25 years ago, the Berlin Wall was breached. Thousands of East German citizens swarmed over and through the ugliest monument to the Cold War, the concrete barrier that had prevented them leaving their country and joining their fellow Germans in the West. But it wasn't just a hideous symbol of the Cold War and the Iron Curtain. It was also painted by artists from all over the world, somehow as a protest against its sheer brutality. The most famous of them all was Thierry Noir.
I painted the Berlin Wall in Kreuzberg in 1984 because it was just in front of my door. That was the first reason. I used to live there since 2 years, and then I remarked slowly I became crazy because it was really a slow, melancholic life. And so I decided just to change something and to paint the wall. It was a protest to paint the wall because it was illegal to paint the wall. The wall was inside the GDR completely, both sides. So the real border was like 5 meters before the wall. So by painting on the Berlin Wall, I was already in East Berlin. That was the danger. And yeah, it was always a battle to one eye paint, the other look after the guards.
Germany was a divided country separated by what I have in my hand, the Iron Curtain. This is a piece of the Iron Curtain, 1,500 kilometers separating East from West Germany, Western Germany from Communist Germany, and I was able to travel 2 months after the wall fell across this horrific frontier, which you could never have touched because there was minefields and what have you, and shoot to kill orders.
We arrived in Berlin very late at night on the 10th, the day after the wall fell. And we came upon a scene that was, in retrospect, rather strange. You may have seen champagne corks popping and so on, on television that night. But actually, by the time we arrived, there was still a very big crowd at the wall, at the Brandenburg Gate. And it was a very awkward and tense atmosphere. People were teasing the guards. The guards were still there in their riot police uniforms. People were jumping off the wall into no man's land, and the guards were throwing them back over the wall. People were shouting things at the guard. And of course, in retrospect, this is the moment when there could have been violence. This is when shooting could have started. And of course, now we know there were people in the Politburo talking about what should we do about these crowds? Shouldn't we start shooting? It was really a key moment. The next day, the day after, these were the days when really big decisions were being taken.
The fall of the wall is a matter of huge emotional significance in Germany. It was a structure that made Germans enemies of each other. It destroyed trust between them. And yet, 25 years after the wall has disappeared, the process of unification is still incomplete.
For Germany, this is a milestone. 25 years of change, of unification, have transformed Germany. They've made it undisputably the leading power in the European Union. They've brought together two very different and disparate political systems. The political reunification in broad brush in Germany has worked very well. Where Germans still have many questions is in the economic reunification. There we've seen the East catch up, but then stagnate. Incomes have steadied at about 70% of West German levels, and nobody really knows how to catch the other 30%.
But did we cheer too soon about the end of the Cold War and the fall of the Iron Curtain? The crisis in Ukraine, the confrontation between the European Union and Russia, sanctions now being introduced against Moscow, all suggest that there's quite a lot of old Cold War thinking still about.
After 1991, when the Soviet Union broke up, we really thought that was the end of communism and that was the end of a certain way of thinking in this part of the world. What we've come to realize, I mean, it's really been clear for the last decade, but it's become very sharply clear in the last few months, is that there was a very powerful and very determined group of revanchist, if you will, KGB officers and others who are very determined not to let Russia integrate into the West, and who are now very determined not to let other countries integrate into the West too. So a kind of anti-Western mentality, a sort of opposition to our form of globalization. Russia is really now run by people who, you know, if not wanting to exactly create a new wall, very much don't want to be part of Western civilization and European culture, and they don't want to integrate into it.
Despite the anti-Western rhetoric in Moscow, Germany and all its neighbours are bound together now in the European Union. That's a source of security that they didn't have before, and it reinforces the feeling that the Cold War is now history.
You can find people who are nostalgic for elements of the past. You know, you can find almost anybody who's nostalgic for their youth or what things were like when I was growing up and so on. But certainly in Central Europe, you really cannot find anybody who wishes communism back.
I don't think anybody wants to bring the Berlin Wall back. I think certainly the Germans are much more satisfied with the current arrangements. I've visited some very poor cities and towns in eastern Germany, and nobody will tell you that they want the old system back. They will grumble that the economy is not as good as it was, that the West Germans were the real beneficiaries of reunification, because it was the West Germans who came in to buy the fancy townhouses and flats and so on in the East. However, you won't find a person who will say, I wish the old system was back.
In comparison with the breadth of history covered by the British Museum's exhibition on Germany, the 25 years since the fall of the Berlin Wall are just a brief moment in time. But the events of November 1989 cannot be underestimated. It marked the end of the Cold War, the disappearance of the Iron Curtain. Those last vestiges of the wall in our minds may yet take another generation to disappear, but the destruction of the wall itself was nothing but a very good thing. This is Quentin Peel for the Financial Times in London.